Hi, this is Jason Cascarino. Thanks for listening to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of the Remaking Middle School Initiative, whose founding partners include Youth-Nex, the University of Virginia's Center to Promote Effective Youth Development, and the Association for Middle Level Education, or AMLE. You can learn about Remaking Middle School on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Now, here's this episode. Hello and welcome to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we explore the many facets that impact young adolescents in the middle school years, from the adverse to the awkward to the awesome. I'm your host, Jason Cascarino. Today, I talk with Lynsey Jeffries and Nyasha Rusununguko from Higher Achievement. Lynsey is CEO and Nyasha Director of Program Operations for the 45-year-old Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit serving middle school-age youth in the out-of-school time space, with a blend of academic enrichment, mentoring, and community building, culminating in high school and ultimately college preparation. Higher Achievement serves students in communities in and around Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Richmond. While the program has been lauded for the increased academic achievement of the students it serves, as Nyasha notes, the more powerful outcomes may come from mentors who help youth see who they can become and build the social capital to make that happen.
Because I think oftentimes our scholars have like these checklists of things that they're supposed to, knock off. Like, I'm a student, I need to get good grades, and I need to, be on my best behavior. Great, but what do you want to be outside of that? Like, you want to be an architect? So like, what do we know about that? Like, how can we get you there? Who can we connect you with? Because so oftentimes our mentors have so many connections that are like beyond, I think, anything that I would have understood as a middle school student. I think our students as well probably don't understand the magnitude, but knowing that someone is there in their corner that they can see weekly that is interested and willing to put them in places or say their names in places that oftentimes they would have never had access to, that's that opportunity gap right there, right? Like, so now we have someone who's in a place that could provide or advocate on behalf of another scholar or something like that to give them that exposure to see if this is something that they really want to do and tell them more about.
In part one of our conversation, Lynsey, Nyasha, and I talk about the history and program model of Higher Achievement, emphasizing literacy, social emotional learning, and high school readiness. And we look at the results the organization is seeing in terms of student academic and other outcomes. In part two, we delve into the ways Higher Achievement staff and mentors deliver a meaningful student experience, the changes they had to make during virtual programming amid the pandemic, and which of those they will keep, and what the pandemic showed about the essential role out-of-school time programs have in education going forward. That's in just a little bit. Now, here's part one of my interview with Lynsey Jeffries and Nyasha Rusununguko. Hi, Lynsey. Hi, Nyasha. Thanks for joining me. It's a delight to have you both here.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. Yes, excited.
Well, let's start by getting to know a little bit about you. Lynsey, you and I have known each other for a little bit. We've run in the same circles, as it were, for a number of years. You are a veteran, let's say, of Higher Achievement, more than 16 years now by my read, and you've come up the ranks, as it were, over that time. And we're going to talk a lot about Higher Achievement here. So maybe take us back a little bit and tell us how and why you first got involved in the world of education and youth service.
Awesome. And thank you so much for having us, Jason. This is such an honor. I've been involved with Higher Achievement actually going back even further, 21 years. If you count my 5 as a volunteer mentor. So I joined as a mentor when I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2000 and mentored a group of scholars for 5 years. And when one of them, Ariel, was accepted to his top choice high school, it stopped me in my track, made me pause and consider how I was spending my time and talents in my career. And I left a corporate foundation program officer job that year to come work for Higher Achievement in 2005, first as a fundraiser and then executive director of our DC work, and now for just over 9 years as CEO. Also, just this past weekend, Ariel and one of my other scholars, Naris, came over and we had a little play date because Ariel has a daughter, Amber, who is 6 years old, same age as my son. I'm proud to be her godmother.
Oh, wow.
And
That's sweet.
Naris has actually adopted 3 kids who came over, and they are very much part of our extended family. And Higher Achievement is, I'm very grateful for Higher Achievement for many things, including the ways in which it has enriched my life and extended my family.
That's awesome. That's really sweet. Nyasha, we are meeting for the first time here, and from what I've read, you have also been working your way up the ranks at Higher Achievement, a little bit earlier in your journey than Lynsey. I see that your degrees are in psychology and social work. How does that background and interest translate to a place like Higher Achievement?
So I was born into like a family of educators. My dad is a dean at one of the top high schools in Indianapolis. My brother has worked as like a dean and criminal justice and just different capacities in schools as well. My sister, a principal of like several high schools. And my mom, a social worker, along with my father as well, who has worked in child settings as well as in hospital settings. So literally like my entire life and upbringing was in education in some capacity. I went to school for my degree in psychology with the thought process that I wanted to be different. I didn't want to work in the school system. I wanted to go maybe the more medical route, but was just always drawn back to education and working with youth in some different capacity. So I got my bachelor's in psychology from Central State University. And now I'm at Howard where I'm pursuing my master's in social work there. It just gives me a different approach. I always knew I wanted to be in education, ultimately just not a teacher. So I take my hats off to teachers. I didn't have that capacity. So Higher Achievement allowed me the space to do that as I came in as a manager of instruction. I worked with volunteers for about 2 years, then was promoted to center director where I oversaw our Ward 8 location as a whole for 2 years. And then just recently within, I think the past month and a half, was promoted to director of program operations. So I oversee multiple locations and operations across our DC site. So yeah.
Lynsey, I mentioned that you've been at Higher Achievement a long time. Higher Achievement has been around a long time. It's an organization that goes back more than 4 decades, which says something in the nonprofit world. We're going to talk a lot about Higher Achievement today and what you all are doing, but just tell me a little bit about the genesis of the organization. Why was it founded? What was it initially designed to do?
Sure. We were founded in 1975 by the vision of a man named Greg Gannon, who was a teacher at Gonzaga College High School, a Jesuit boys' school here in Washington, D.C. And he saw the excellent education the boys at Gonzaga were receiving, and yet right across the street was public housing. Particularly in the 70s, it was a tough place to be growing up. And he built connections in the neighborhood and started informally tutoring and helping students, boys from that neighborhood, get acceptance and scholarship into Gonzaga. It grew and changed over the years, and we, of course, serve boys and girls now, and we support scholars going to all different kinds of college, preparatory, high school programs. We do still send some boys to Gonzaga. Greg continues to be an inspiration, and although he passed away in 2006, very early, unfortunately, due to brain cancer, his daughters and wife are still engaged in Higher Achievement, and we are advancing that mission today. I don't think they would have said they were closing the opportunity gap. I don't know that that would have been the terminology back in the 70s, but that's what they were doing, and that's what we continue to do today.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that and give us a flavor of the programming here. So, Lynsey, what are the core elements of what you offer? And then, Nyasha, given your role, it'd be great to get a picture of what Higher Achievement sort of really looks like in some of your partner schools.
Sure. So we are an academic enrichment program that centers on mentoring. We work very importantly in the middle school space, which is obviously a focus of this podcast. And I wish I could scream it from every rooftop how important middle school is for a young person's development, second only to early childhood in brain development and a time of extraordinary learning and self-identity development. We focus on those grades, 5th through 8th grade. We have an extended high dosage after school program that culminates in placement in college preparatory high school programs going into 9th grade. And we've adapted a lot in this time. My description of higher achievement in 2018 would be different than it was last year with virtual higher achievement, and is a little bit different than it is this year as we return to COVID recovery work. Right now, what we're focused on is continuing to be academic enrichment, but going deeper in high dosage literacy tutoring, given what we've seen that our scholars need and what schools and families have asked for our support around, as well as social justice-based mentoring year by year that supports our scholars' understanding of self and community and making strong choices about where they want to go to high school to carve the future path for their lives.
That's great. And Nyasha, just paint us a picture, if you will, in a school environment. If I'm a student or an educator at a higher achievement partnered school, what am I experiencing? What does it look like?
Most definitely. When you walk in, you're very much so experiencing a sense of community across the board. Like, whether you want to say like it's a family, oftentimes our centers will use that terminology, just the culture, the community, and just all around space that you walk in. Very inviting, very welcoming, very loving. Our scholars oftentimes are, the moment you will walk through the door, they're met by music, high energy staff. They're just chilling out after the day because it is a long day for them. They've been at school since 8, 9 in the morning. And we oftentimes see them between 3:30 and 4 is when they start higher achievement. So we just set up a place for them to just decompress for a second, like be a scholar, be a kid, just hang out. Once everyone's come in for the most part, at that point, like Lynsey said, we have jumped into high dosage literacy tutoring this year. So scholars will be receiving and working with the program called Achieve 3000, which is an online platform that focuses solely on literacy with our scholars. So scholars alongside their either literacy tutor or literacy aide, so that's our part-time staff and some of our volunteers, are working in small groups of ideally no more to 3 to 5, where they are reading a lesson that has been selected by the learning director, and then going from there and having open-ended discussions, answering the questions. And Achieve 3000 has a unique opportunity where, regardless of a scholar's reading level, everyone can still receive the information that they need. Literacy is an area that many of our scholars struggle in. And so Achieve 3000 has allowed scholars not to feel as though that they can't keep up with their fellow peers as someone may be a stronger reader than them. So Achieve 3000 gives us that unique opportunity. Once they're out of that literacy block that happens for roughly 45 minutes to an hour, scholars as well have time for study hall, which is what we call our learning blocks, where they can get that additional support and help from their part-time staff and full-time staff, our learning directors and learning coordinators, to receive any additional help that they need on their current homework that they have going on in school. We want to make sure that they are also learning other things, but their main goal as well is to make sure that they keep their grades up and, they're excelling academically during the school year as well. So once all those academic pieces are taken care of, community meeting, which is a highlight of many scholars' day, is where everyone comes together in a large group form, all grade levels, mentors at this point, and other volunteers are present as well. And there's some type of activity that is done, whether it's a good old competition of some type where we have like our kinesthetic knowledge bowls, whether it is a discussion about some current event that has happened in the world or in their neighborhoods. Everything is based and focused around SEL. We have really dove straight into social emotional learning, like all in, making sure everything that we do is surrounded and embedded in SEL in each component of center and programming. So you'll see that through scholars having the opportunity to lead these large group opportunities, as well as scholar voice and choice, where they get to decide what they're going to do. Natural debates and healthy conversation is happening amongst one another so that they know how to advocate for themselves and speak up and learn and ask those hard questions that maybe they're not comfortable asking elsewhere, but they want to know the answers to. So our staff provides them with that safe space to be sure that they can do that. And then once community meeting happens, scholars are met by their lovely, amazing mentors that come either once or twice a week, where they receive their high school readiness mentoring. So oftentimes in the past, in higher achievement tradition, our 8th graders were the main focus of like our high school placement process. But we have made the great decision to make sure that even in 5th and 6th grade, they're talking about what high schools and different options and figuring out what is available to them, knowing the DC landscape. And we want to make sure that our scholars, by the time they get to 8th grade, feel sound and secure in their decisions along with their families and can make a best decision for themselves so that they can graduate on time in 4 years, which is what we want, and go off to some amazing post-secondary opportunity, whether that's college, the military, or some type of trade school.
Yeah, I love the emphasis on culture. I often say we need to approach and engage with young adolescents as people first. And then what is the sort of broad package of learning and development experience that we can kind of build around them in terms of where they are in their developmental time period. And Nyasha, I had the opportunity to come see higher achievement in action in one of the schools in DC. And the community session was around high school choice. And I love the sort of highly relevant and highly topical for young people, which I assume is by design. And then the tutoring session or the mentoring session was actually mathematics. It wasn't literacy. So, but you work in different regions of the country, different cities and so forth. So is the programming somewhat variable, or is it pretty standard when you think about across your portfolio of schools that you work with?
Yeah, so we operate from Baltimore through Richmond in 5 districts. So Baltimore, Prince George's, DC, Alexandria, and Richmond, also some charter LEAs. And the program, the standard components that Nyasha described, literacy tutoring, learning blocks, community meeting, mentoring, those blocks you would see as consistent across all of those districts. But the way that learning blocks in particular and community meeting offer lots of opportunity to partner differently depending on what assets we have in each of our schools, what the interests are of young people. At times, learning blocks are bringing in partners around sports and arts and community and organizing and different things. So there are a lot of different opportunities based on what the school environment is and what the scholars are interested in. Community meeting as well. There are structures that our learning directors and learning coordinators can pull from. It's also an opportunity to really make it their own and make sure that it is individualized, because we know that each of our school communities is different. But the literacy tutoring and the high school readiness mentoring are more structured and more consistent across the board, which enables us to provide more consistent coaching and training and supports for those sites as well.
I know you all are big believers in data and measuring impact. In Nyasha, I want to hear about how you leverage data for programming, particularly for making important adjustments and to drive better results. But Lynsey, as a precursor to that, let's talk about the kinds of results you're seeing. Higher achievement has had this unusual opportunity, I might say, of being part of not one but 2 randomized control trial studies, which is largely seen as the gold standard in program evaluation. First, how did those evaluation opportunities come about? RTCs are notoriously hard to do. They're expensive to do. And for most nonprofits, it might seem, risky to take part in a complex, resource-intensive evaluation that may not tell you what you want to hear.
For sure. Great question, Jason. I have been the subject of 2 randomized controlled trials. Both of them were published by MDRC, the first in 2013, the second last year in 2020. And the first one is really the genesis story of that is probably the most interesting because, and I credit previous executive director for getting that off the ground, Maureen Halla. She believed strongly in higher achievement, and we were doing our own internal measurement at the time. But skeptics would say to her, of course your kids are doing better because it's a crazy rigorous program and they've got more committed families. And so how much can you really attribute to the actual intervention of higher achievement? She wanted to test that skepticism and started doing our own randomized controlled trial study before we had any money with staff at the time. This is before I was on staff in the early 2000s. And we're randomizing, we're accepting students through a lottery and trying to track the results. Use that sort of very rudimentary data to apply for funding to do a more serious study. We applied unsuccessfully 3 times to the William T. Grant Foundation, probably because they advertise on NPR. We were pretty scrappy at the time, still are really. And every time we got denied, we called the president of the foundation, Bob Granger, and said, how can we do better? And he took our calls, God bless him, and said, finally, you need a real researcher partner for us to take you seriously. And he connected us with Jean Grossman, who was at PPV at the time, and then went on to MDRC. Jean has been our consistent research partner, as well as Carla Herrera and Lee Linden. And that ultimately led William T. Grant to invest, as well as Atlantic Philanthropies, Wallace Foundation, and a few others in this study, which is a $4.2 million study, which we took on when our annual budget was $900,000. It's just really ridiculous thinking back on it. I don't know, you asked about the risk. I don't know if we were clear-eyed enough to know how risky it was. The chance of getting negative results is much higher. Negative or null results is much higher. It's like 90% of RCTs show null or negative findings. But we did want to answer the skeptic's question and get better. We've always wanted to learn and improve, and our program did prove successful. The first study showed statistically significant positive results in 3 areas: test scores, particularly math test scores that extended into high school, placement in college preparatory programs, and family engagement in that high school placement process. Those study results caught the attention of other influencers in the education space. Jim Shelton, who was the Deputy Secretary of Education at the time, strongly encouraged us to apply for a I3 grant because he saw, that required a high level of evidence to receive that level of investment. And ultimately, that first study led us to get, to our knowledge, the biggest investment the Department of Ed has ever made in an after-school program, which was $12 million over 5 years to expand our services, advance our mentoring work. And that also included a second randomized control trial study to continue to build the evidence base. That second study is what was published last year, and again showed statistical significance, particularly in report card grades, and particularly our math grades among our Black boys in Baltimore were very, very strong effect sizes. But report card grades across the board, across all of our school district partners.
That's really interesting and I think instructive too, because at least our friends at the University of Chicago here locally where I am have done a lot of work in trying to predict the long-term success of young people, particularly from middle school into college. And one of the big predictors is grades. We often look at test scores as being the benchmark, but the evidence is showing that, in some cases attendance, but certainly classroom grades that teachers are giving out based on the experience that they're having in the classroom. So to be able to affect classroom grades, I think is a pretty good indicator of potential long-term success for the students in your program.
We've been looking at the same thing. Our long-term intended impact is around, as Nyasha said, 100% on-time high school graduation, 65% post-secondary credential attainment. And it's both the academic prowess and the social emotional skills, the organizational skills, all of that. And that's why we've always internally measured report card grades as the real litmus test, like what we're aiming for. And so to see that show up in the RCT data was compelling.
That was part 1 of my interview with Lynsey Jeffries and Nyasha Rusununguko. In part 2, we will talk about how higher achievement sets up its staff and mentors to impact the aspirations and attainments of the young adolescents they serve, how the pandemic affected and even improved some aspects of the program model, and how important out-of-school time is to help youth and their families thrive. That's in just a moment on the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we feature conversations with researchers, practitioners, program developers, and advocates for young adolescents in the middle school years. A while ago, we concluded our first season with a conversation with Kiana Dixon and Janika Jackson. Kiana and Janika are students at Brooklyn College and alumni of the Peer Group Connection program offered by the Center for Supportive Schools, or CSS. Peer Group Connection positions upperclassmen and women in high school to mentor incoming ninth graders transitioning into high school from middle school. They are both now consultants with CSS, helping to develop new programming and providing professional learning for educators in practices that incorporate student voice, which plays an important role in helping educators engage with young adolescents.
So not only were we available to help them with academic things, but it was mainly social skills and life skills. So instead of calling ourselves mentors, we were more big sisters to them. The biggest reason why I decided to be a part of PGC was because of the fact that I didn't have that type of helping hand or that type of guidance whenever I was a freshman. Because there's this rebellious phase that you might have, or you're always angry or sad about the things that are happening outside of school. And sometimes kids tend to bring that to school, and it affects the way that they act in the classroom or the way they do their work. And I feel like our biggest thing was helping them with those situations so that they can prosper in every other area.
You can catch all of my conversation with Kiana and Janika in a previous episode. And now, returning for part 2 of my conversation with Lynsey Jeffries and Nyasha Rusununguko. And Nyasha, these evaluations, they serve their purpose. They're useful in their own way, but they also take a lot of time. And when you're running a program and you've got thousands of young people that you're serving right now, every day, you need more real-time, in-the-moment data to constantly see where you're at and what to adjust. How does that ongoing continuous improvement process work at Higher Achievement?
So for our center staff, particularly our learning directors, like on hand immediately, one thing that stands out to me is they very strongly look at higher days of scholar attendance and participation. So like, let's use Ida B. Wells, our Ward 4 site. Most of their scholars attend that school. So they have about 80 scholars. And I would say out of the 80, 72 of them are Ida B. Wells scholars. So for instance, the learning director there, Ms. Shavante, might notice that on Wednesdays where she has, let's say, mentoring and other components of programming are the days that those scholars that are involved in other activities have like practice or games or something like that, right? So like scholar participation is low on those days because they have their other programs that they're involved in as well. So just simply looking at Salesforce, which is the database that we use, she could switch her schedule accordingly to make sure that more scholars are receiving the program accordingly, on time and at a higher dosage, as well as the real-time report card data that we get to put in each semester. We can see if scholars are growing or if they're declining. So how can we as a center either put in additional supports, whether that's additional supplemental work? How can we advocate for them or get additional help in for them so that they are receiving that additional help as well? And then another really great thing that happened since the pandemic, I think the summer before we started doing individual family meetings where we were able to sit down with scholars and families on an individual basis, check in and see what their goals are for their scholar, what the scholar's goals are, what they want for themselves, how they feel like they're performing academically, socially, and emotionally, how we can support them better. And all of this lives in Salesforce. So now this is information we can give to their mentor, to whoever their literacy tutor or anyone is, so that everyone is on the same page for this scholar, so that we are challenging them, encouraging them, and pushing them accordingly so that they can be their absolute best. And checking in with them authentically, because I think oftentimes our scholars have like these checklists of things that they're supposed to, knock off. Like, I'm a student, I need to get good grades, and I need to, be on my best behavior. Great. But what do you want to be outside of that? Like, you want to be an architect? So like, what do we know about that? Like, how can we get you there? Who can we connect you with? But knowing that someone is there in their corner that they can see weekly that is interested and willing to put them in places or say their names in places that oftentimes they would have never had access to, that's that opportunity gap right there, right? Like, so now we have someone who's in a place that could provide or advocate on behalf of another scholar or something like that to give them that exposure to see if this is something that they really want to do and tell them more about as a whole. So definitely having Salesforce allows us to get that raw data of like looking at grades, looking at attendance, looking at participation, but also that SEL component of goals for the scholar, how they plan to achieve, and how we can support them all around as well.
Can we talk a little bit more about the staff? You mentioned Salesforce and the tools that you have, and obviously there's the curriculum and the programming, but the human capital element is really critical. And you talked about a lot of different components here. When I think about, again, the early adolescent time period, a lot of it developmentally is about forming their own identity and this sort of notion of self-discovery and finding what their path is long term. And that takes a lot of work to kind of individualize an experience. And you have your staff working with the students to try to unpack that, working with the families, as you mentioned, working with the mentors, and working with the teachers too, I'm assuming, engaging with them on what the students need. Just talk about how you think about how you staff your program, who you find, who are these people that do all this wonderful work, and how do you develop them?
Very intentionally. I think it's one of those things where someone who someone just has it when they have it, right? Like when you talk to them, when you interview them, when you see that their personal goals and their personal mission aligns with what we are trying to do as an organization as a whole, what we want for our scholars to be in front of, because this is someone who's going to impact their life. Like, they're going to spend, X amount of hours a week with this individual outside of, school and stuff like that as well. So we want them obviously to be in front of someone who is very intentional with what they're exposing to the scholars, and making sure that they are, on page with what we are doing, but just they themselves are strong individuals as well. A lot of our staff are, we have former teachers who, no longer decided to transition out of the classroom, but still wanted to be in education. We have individuals like myself who just enjoyed and loved working with children, but didn't want to be a teacher, but wanted to still continue to have that impact in some type of way or another. I feel like I'm biased, but in a good way. It's just such a strong team of individuals to be surrounded and working along with others who just really want to make sure that our scholars are prepared for the world, and that they are natural leaders, that they are confident in themselves, that they are sure of themselves, despite what others may say to them. Because our demographic, we serve Black and brown students and scholars every day. And we know what they are facing internally as well as externally, things that they can't control and things that, that they're just battling with internally themselves. And so we want to make sure that we are doing our best to let them know, like, that they are worthy of everything that they worked for, worthy of every opportunity that is supposed to come their way. Like, don't think that it's luck. Like, no, you worked for this. You deserve every bit of this. I often think of times like our scholars who, when they get into these top high schools, oh my gosh, like the excitement that they see and that they feel, and like their families, because oftentimes it's a fresh start. Like, we don't know necessarily all of their stories before they got to us, but to know that we played an intricate role in how the next part of their life could pan out, it's just so powerful for us. And we know that we have that opportunity. And so we just want to make sure that we do it right, and that we make sure that they are set up for success, so that they feel confident once they leave us to know that you can still come back, because they don't go far at all. Like Lynsey said, she's still in contact with some of her students who are mentors. And same with me. I still check in. Like, I'm like, hey, how are midterms going? What's going on? Like, are you getting to class and everything? It's just very full circle. So the staff that we have are very dedicated individuals.
And I would say, just knowing the field of after-school programs, higher achievement is a little unusual in that each of our schools, while we operate out of a school, each of our centers has 2 full-time staff members. That's expensive. It's more expensive than many other models that rely on AmeriCorps or, have a kind of a staffing structure that is spread across multiple schools. We do a lot of work to fundraise for that. We also know that particularly the center director or learning director staff retention through our regression analysis is connected directly. 40% of the tenure of that director is attributable to the scholars' retention. And what we know from the RCTs is that a student needs to stay with higher achievement for 2 years in order to get that statistical significance in the results. And so even from the quantitative side, the investment in staff is worth it. And the only way you get to these results, at least in higher achievement's experience, has been to hire, train, support really strong leaders to build and maintain these relationships with our scholars.
Yeah. Well, I love just being honest and upfront about it and saying, look, the data shows that this is what it takes. I feel like in working and having been in your shoes, Lynsey, I think we're often sort of pressured to, get the cost down and to try to get more efficiencies and so forth. But to just be honest about, look, this is what it takes. It's an investment. And if you really want to get the results that we're seeing, and particularly for young adolescents in middle school, a lot of it is driven by relationships and them trusting you and having that engagement with you. And that takes a while. It takes these sort of long-standing relationships. So just being honest and upfront, and the data showing the level of investment that's required, I think that's really good and refreshing and important for people to hear. Last year I talked with so many program providers about how they had to adapt in the midst of the pandemic. And one of the things about that really struck me is that pretty early on, many of them realized that some of these adaptations had staying power. Like in a lot of cases, they felt that they were actually delivering programming better because of the pandemic-driven changes that they were making. Did you all have a similar experience? Has higher achievement evolved in ways that will stick?
We have definitely evolved. I think there's two things that were silver linings on program design. Nyasha, feel free to weigh in or correct me if I'm wrong. One is the high school placement work. We found that doing the Zoom conversations with scholars and families, we're able to bring the families more into the conversations and tailor the conversations to the eighth graders in a more effective way. We tended to work in the in-person model with 2 or 3 scholars at the same time, all working on essays for different schools, and like just being able to individualize and really have that be convenient for families and our eighth graders is something that we will likely pull forward even in this in-person time. The second is small group instruction. Previously, we had an aspiration for this, but hadn't gotten there quite yet. Our academic support was study hall, and it was homework help, and it was 15 to 1 typically, 15 students to 1 adult. And it wasn't the shining moment of higher achievement usually. And we couldn't get to that discrete skill development that was needed. And being able to do office hours, sometimes one-on-one with scholars virtually. And then we did virtual math pods during our virtual year. That actually led to the literacy tutoring. We actually found that even with math, the reading comprehension struggles were showing up in math. Just the ability to understand the word problems effectively. We saw the slippages, you see this in the data as well. For everyone struggled virtually, regardless of socioeconomic status, but for students in Title I schools, lower income family students, the struggles tended to be more exacerbated in literacy. And I think in general, families of higher incomes and more flexibility were able to more intuitively support on the literacy. And so the achievement gaps are widening in literacy, and we know how important that is as sort of a metacognitive strand and skill that goes across all 4 core subjects, as well as being really important for the high school application process, important for social justice so that scholars can refine their thoughts and lift up their voices. And it led us to do this deep dive on literacy tutoring, which I think will continue in the years to come. What would you add, Nyasha? You were delivering virtual center. I saw you engaging with grandmas and brothers and sisters and people in the car, people in the kitchen. Curious about.
No, I would say what you said is spot on. For the first time, though, it truly gave us a lens inside of our scholars' homes, right? Like they tell us things and, we might have like general conversation, but we really got to see the dynamic of this scholar lives with mom, grandma, dad, aunt, and uncle, right? Like there's like a lot of other components that are going on, or this scholar, is having this issue or whatever. And I think if anything, it magnified maybe the inequities in regards to access and resources, because we've lost a lot of scholars at the same time because they didn't have Wi-Fi. They didn't have laptops, right? And that's how we were delivering our program. And so oftentimes our work turned more into, for those scholars who could not attend with us virtually, us just calling and continuing just to check in and make sure they're okay. The pandemic was hitting and affecting individuals in ways that I don't think any of us could have imagined as quickly as it did. So I'll definitely say, Lynsey, you hit it spot on. Being able to individualize and tailor like our high school readiness conversations, I think was the first time that I truly felt like me and my families were on the same page with their scholar, right? So we had those conversations where a scholar might have, let's say, wanted to say actually I want to go to Bard, and mom and dad were very, strong on them going to another school, but they felt supported because I was there to advocate with them and say hey, let's just give everyone a chance to speak, kind of mediate in some situations. And same with the math pods, even with our scholars who struggled in math and those that excelled, I saw a great sense of scholars empowering one another because they were able to teach one another, right? Like, I'm not a math teacher. So Miss Nyasha was learning just as some of the scholars were learning too. Like, I was on Google right before and on YouTube trying to figure out how do we do fractions again the new way and all these different things. And, I would explain it. And I just remember I had a 6th grade group of scholars who showed up consistently every Monday. It was like 8 of them. And they came and consistently worked with me and worked with one another and just rallied around each other. There was like that sense of normalcy for them. That was like their engagement. That was their time to catch up, but also continue to learn. And it was just great being able to see them do that.
So let's talk about the future. What's next for higher achievement? Nyasha, maybe you can start. What are the opportunities that you see to even further improve and enhance the program model? You talked about a number of the things that you've already done, whether it's SEL or the staffing ratios or some of the literacy components. Or what do you see in terms of what you're able to do in the future to make higher achievement even better?
I see our partnerships with our schools growing even more. I see us being able to be like intricate and seen as a resource for the school, not just after school, not just like, oh, higher achievement's that after school program, but like higher achievement is present, let's say after lunch, and just like an additional resource for our schools to have and be on board. I see us continuing to create those true leaders in future lawmakers and congressmen and women and teachers and doctors of tomorrow. I just think I can't speak any higher of our scholars. Like, they are amazing. Like, they really, really, really are. And higher achievement, as we continue to grow and develop, continues to allow them a place for them to really become those things and see it for the first time, I think, clearly. And that is definitely something that I see us continuing to do and growing further in as well.
The pandemic has really shone a light on how essential out-of-school time learning and development is. And you mentioned that for youth, and especially young adolescents, what are some of your reflections as you look at the space as a whole and higher achievement's place in it?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has certainly shone a light on the inequities that exist in our country and how quickly they grew over 16, 17 months. And for the first time, I've seen federal policy, major philanthropy begin to say, we need to broaden who we consider our educators. We need everybody in this fight together, because otherwise our country's going to slip. And that means we need volunteer mentors. That means we need university partnerships. That means we need amazing frontline leaders like Nyasha and all of our learning directors and learning coordinators to be working in concert with families, in concert with schools, to listen closely to students, help them learn, help them share their voices, help them feel like they matter, because they do.
Finally, for the two of you, if there was one bit of advice based on your experience delivering programming for young adolescents that you would offer to educators, both in school and in after school and in summer programs, of things they either ought to know or ought to be doing, what would it be?
I would say don't count them out. This is a time where, if anything, they need us the most because they're really trying to figure it out. Middle school is probably, I think all of us have the most awkward and probably uncomfortable memories of us in middle school. So putting yourself in their shoes, especially growing up in the world that they're growing in today. And we found, through our mentors, and I think just even ourselves personally, to have one or two caring adults, makes a difference. It truly makes a difference and impacts a scholar's trajectory as they go through school and even after school. And so just embracing them and who they are, all their greatness and their emotions and their awkwardness at this age, so that you can see what they are capable of, seeing those bright spots in them, even though they might not be able to see them in themselves, and just feeding that light that they know that they need and oftentimes crave.
Yeah, I would just co-sign on that and say that middle school matters. Middle school matters so much. We have to engage them in middle school. It's when they are developing who they are as people. It's when they start to see the world independently. And it is a gift and a privilege to get to work with students in this time, to listen to them and to, try to open up the world more broadly.
Lynsey, Nyasha, thank you. This has been a fun conversation. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Good luck to you and Higher Achievement. And thank you for all you're doing for middle school age youth.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Jason.
That was Lynsey Wood Jeffries and Nyasha Rusununguko from Higher Achievement. You can follow Higher Achievement online at higherachievement.org or on Twitter at higherachieve. Thanks for joining the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of Remaking Middle School, an initiative that seeks to transform the learning and development experience for young adolescents in the middle school years. Remaking Middle School brings together good educational practice in school and out of school with the latest developmental science. You can learn about Remaking Middle School or find more resources about the topics of this podcast on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Or learn more about the founding partner organizations, the University of Virginia's Youth-Nex Center on the web at education.virginia.edu/youth-nex, or on Twitter at youth_nex, and the Association for Middle Level Education on the web at amle.org or on Twitter at AMLE. The Lessons in Adolescence podcast is produced by Abby Gillespie and me, Jason Cascarino, editing by Paige Waterhouse. You can listen to or download each episode at the Remaking Middle School website, on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.